Alrighty. Well, this is the first.
Yeah. Is this your first podcast?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I've done a lot of these first podcasts. It's kind of weird. Like, I mean, I myself have I have not the time nor the creativity to do any kind of original TikTok work. I don't have a field that I could really cover. And if I reported on the chicken plant that I work at, that's a felony. So I don't have any.
Oh man, that's terrible. I bet.
Yeah, no. So at the podcast, I'm like 30 subscribers, which is like friends and family, and they don't even watch it. Like they're like, I loved your podcast, dude. I watched it. I'm like, no. The 5 people that watched my podcast watched it for like 5 to 10 minutes. You didn't enjoy my podcast. You gave me the view, which is appreciated still. But
well, I actually got halfway through the Mead King.
Oh, really?
Today.
I did notice that there was like the average watch time went up a bit. I look at my analytics like I look at my Robinhood, which is obsessively 5 to 6 times a day.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I was like, because I know we talked over a month ago, and I was like, because I've got a podcast I'm doing on Sunday.
Oh,
and then I've got another one I'm doing on Monday. And I've listened to the one on Monday before, and I've never listened to the one that I'm doing on Sunday. So it's like, well, I better start listening to everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't have premium YouTube.
Oh no.
So when I was listening to yours, my tablet's on, but the moment I get up and I go outside, or I plug my headphones in, I can't necessarily bring it with me. So I guess I'll have to invest.
Oh, well,
premium so I can do that.
They kind of fucked up at the processing plant I work at, and they went to digital. And so instead of writing on the tablets, you type it in, or write it in on paper, you type it in on the tablet. And so that the paperwork, it requires internet. And if you know the right person, you might just be able to get your hands on the password to that internet. So for the 9 hours that they work me 5 to 6 times a day, constant podcast and audiobooks. Like I'm earning a bachelor's degree in useless knowledge.
No knowledge is useless, because the one day that you will need it, you'll suddenly have.
Oh, that's a thing though. Like I'll run into I think there was a dude that was at a friend's wedding. He has like a doctorate in AI. He's from India, and he was one of the groomsmen. And the dude I was like, oh, I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast on AI last week with Lex Friedman, and I started throwing up like a couple of terminologies, and then like his eyes brightened. It's like, holy shit, you know about AI? Are you a thing? I'm like, no, I'm an idiot, but I got enough of base level to keep you entertained.
Sure. Do you listen to Dan Carlin at all?
Dan Carlin, the name
Hardcore History.
Yes. No, I've listened to his stuff. His stuff has got a paywall, and it's not yet. I'm not there yet. Once these start paying me, I'll definitely hook up to him, because he does have good shit, I hear.
Yeah, he's got some on iTunes, but I kid you not, he's probably got 300 hours of podcast, and he's got, I think, on what's available in iTunes right now is, I think, 2 complete series, which are 3 to 5 episodes. So he had one on the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and it's 3 or 4 parts, and then the one that's most recent is a 3-part series on the rise of Imperial Japan.
Oh, okay, I might like that.
So like 1850 to 1945, that kind of forcible, when Matthew Perry, our admiral in the Black Ships, showed up and said, hey, guess what? You're part of the world now. how Imperial Japan rose and tried to keep this mythos of Bushido and the samurai way and all of this stuff, which wasn't the greatest thing in the beginning. It was kind of just, it was like us with knights and cavalrymen. Yes, the samurai are elite. There's still this, feudal system kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you control your population when their worldview has so incredibly changed?
Yeah.
With, the first traders and stuff to get to Japan who were European, I think were the Dutch. It's either the Dutch or the Portuguese. They made a movie with I think Liam Neeson and what's his name? Kylo Ren, Adam Driver.
Yeah, Adam Driver.
And they made a movie about, and I think they're Protestant missionaries, and I think they're Dutch.
God.
And it's this, where and it's like the 15th century when this is going on.
The only kind of like pseudo feudal Japan movie I ever remember is like Last Samurai. I did not know that Driver and Harrison Ford, you said, right?
Liam Neeson.
I did not know that they did like a feudal Japan movie, because
it's relatively recent in the last couple years. So it's relatively recent.
That's pretty good.
I of course can't remember what it's called, but
it's both of those actors and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure something will pull up. It's kind of weird, like how like tightly Japan tried holding on to those values, and now they run the market on cat girls that confuse American boy sexuality. It's wild.
It's incredible. There was and of course I can't remember his name right when I'm in front of the camera and I have to talk about him. Do you remember the Japanese soldier who was found in like 1974?
Yeah, I think there's like a Korean and a Vietnamese soldier that's like that. They have the same thing. They just had no idea that the war ended, and they just like wasted away surviving in the wilderness. If that's the drift I'm kind of catching.
It kind of is. The thing that this guy said when he finally came out, he's like, when he's getting interviewed, I mean, because he's this relic from the Second World War, and he's he's been living. It was first there were 20 of them, and then there were 10, and then there were 8, and then there were 3 guys left, and one died of natural causes, and the other one was killed by a Philippine farmer for stealing chickens or something like that. He just happened to get shot or stuck with a pitchfork or something. But this one guy, the one guy who survived, and they knew he was there. Like, it was not a secret that they just suddenly found him one day. The Japanese military had been trying to coax him out since 1947.
I remember details like this. They were like yelling through speakers, like, dude, the war's over. He's like, I'm not believing you.
Yeah, they finally had to get his commander.
Wow.
To like found this crumpled up little Japanese guy who like lost his legs on Okinawa or something, who is this dude's commander, and wheeled him out there, and he called him back. But when he finally kind of got back, and he acclimated to society a little bit, and they were interviewing him there, they asked him, he's like, why'd you stay out so long? He's like, you don't understand how we were raised.
Oh yeah.
When you say that Japan has surrendered, that means there is no Japan to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was such a total thing for them. So it didn't, it was all a joke. It was all a lie. It was all a scam trying to get him to come out of the woods, because the Japan he knew would have never surrendered.
Yeah.
And that's on the low.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm not ignoring you just because you see me looking down. I actually remember something like this. It was an anime movie called, and I just found it, In the Corner of the World. It was about like this girl that marries into a family like during the World War II, and like like bombs are dropped, and like she like she finds a hole in the ground where one of the mortars had like not exploded, and then she like remembers and this is spoilers obviously for anyone who's listening in like 5 years, but it's like a hole in the ground, like a tortoise hole, and then she like remembers like these little educational, this is what happened when America bombs our cities, because that was a thing we apparently did, like fuck the military bases, let's go straight for the civilians. But
that was something that we did.
Bad.
it was a completely different doctrine.
Oh yeah.
When it came to fighting in the Pacific, than it was fighting in the Atlantic. Have you watched Band of Brothers?
Not recently, but I do watch a lot of like, I have a couple of veterans in the family, so you know, war movies were a lot of the thing. Yeah. But I remember specifically in that movie where like her and I believe this would have been her younger sister-in-law or her sister-in-law's daughter, so I assume that would be a niece, that they were walking around and she saw like the niece pointed out, hey look, it's a tortoise hole, and she's like, no, there's not a tortoise hole, and then the mine pops.
There's something else.
Yeah, no, the mine pops, tears off her arm, kills the little girl, and then like 2 or 3 months down the road, they're like, Japan's surrendering it, and she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? What happened? Yeah. What happened to every Japanese person dies to the last man, woman, child, civilian standing? And I'm like, yo, this ain't your fight. Just.
Well,
but it's a different kind. Those were some brutal people. Like,
well, yeah, and that was
just wildness, savagery.
You know, that's one of the things. Well, I don't know if I would use the term savage so much as driven.
As far as like Bushidos go, like the actual samurai, but not the average. They were accustomed to that savagery of war.
It was indoctrination.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's. I mean, you know, I mean, we see it today, but it's, you know, it's almost lighter today. Dare I say, it's just as bad. But I mean, you know, short of North Korea, you don't have an entire system that's aimed towards this single goal.
No.
You know, you can have a huge part of the population aimed to it. I mean, look at the last president.
Oh yeah. No, that was as close as we ever gotten in a while.
Yeah, and it was way too close.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, yeah. But you know, it's one of those things, and I've been asked this about judging historic events and people who have some sort of standing in history by today's standards. Is it a good idea? Is it smart? Is it something we can do? And the answer is no, because we have no concept of how people thought in 1935 or 1940. And I'm talking adults. I'm talking, you know, 25 to 45, because they're all gone.
Yeah.
And all of the influences that they grew up in are gone. You know, when you go to, say you go to the middle of Ghana somewhere, and life in the middle of Ghana has not changed in the last 1,000 years, that we can't even look at that and have a concept of what's going on, because of all the stimuli around us, you know. And they might not necessarily, you know, the subsistence farmers in the middle of Africa somewhere might not have the same ability to recognize our view of the world, because here's their worldview and it doesn't hardly ever move.
Yeah, they're within like 1,600 square miles that they just like either farm or hunt and gather in. So like, I remember it was a book. I think it was, it might have been the Sapiens series, but it probably wasn't. I usually, whenever I listen my books through again, it's like Sapiens is like one of the first books that I read. But it was this hunter-gatherer group in like Brazil or something came to England like during like Victorian era, more or less, which is kind of wild how they were like brought there and not like abducted and taught like proper manners and then sent back to like bring everybody back in. But it may have been later than that. But I remember them leave. No, they had planes. So this was fairly recently, I guess, within the last 50 years or so. I remember how they like, we want to go back home because y'all literally have people jumping out of buildings where we hold life so near and dear. But thank you so much for the invent of fletching our arrows. We have just been not doing that thing, and now we're going to be like 100 times more successful hunting. So
and when you think of that, I mean, and that's one of the things that kind of comes up in my job is these changes in technology and how they have such a huge impact on the area around you. So one of the things that that comes up with people who are asking me questions on TikTok. I've had a bunch of people ask me, what about mammoths? What about, megafauna? Is it true that humans killed them all? And it's one of those, well, they didn't help.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like climate change. It's like, how much are we attributing? Like, how much did we attribute? What's the percentage? That's pretty much the question.
Well, back then, I mean, now we've attributed a lot.
Oh yeah.
But back then, like the mammoth is a great example of this because, especially recently, because I've been getting asked a lot about a lot of questions concerning indigenous peoples in the Americas, the archaeology that proves they were here. And all of this stuff, because I mean, I don't know if you've gotten caught up on the things I've talked about on TikTok recently.
Oh, it's archaeology in the U.S. I know where it's at. It's it's Corbin,
it's ridiculous.
It's Corvus, or it's the Younger Dryas. Clovis. Damn it.
Well, yeah. So I did a little bit on Clovis. I did a 3-part series on Clovis the other day because some right-wing, overly militant, believes Soviets are in his Cheerios kind of guy, posted a bunch of like a 5-part, or his entire page is hate on archaeologists. Archaeologists are lying. I mean, he's one of these people that has swallowed the Graham Hancock and Ancient Aliens theories down so deep that there's no pulling that particular hook out. And
let me interrupt just real quick. I see by your expression in the exhale there. I don't necessarily see where you and Graham Hancock are disagreeing at, because I've listened to a couple of your videos, and to my knowledge, and I kind of re-listened to a couple of his episodes with Joe Rogan last week, he was really anti-Clovis. You kind of sounded like, hey, the evidence didn't used to point to anti-Clovis, but now it's definitely more or less. Well, besides the whole, he's a journalist and not an archaeologist, and maybe he's a little frazzled with archaeology literally opening his mouth and shitting down his throat until that kind of Clovis stuff went out the window, I don't necessarily see where y'all are disagreeing. So explain that to me just a bit more for
well, so archaeology archaeology is a humanity, not a science.
Yes.
However, there is a bunch of stuff within archaeology that could be scientifically tested.
Absolutely.
So, what we're doing is, when you ask an archaeologist a question, you say, is this true? An archaeologist is going to say either yes, because we have evidence for it, no, because we have no evidence for it, or the current theory is, because the evidence we have, the incomplete evidence we have is pointing to that.
Okay.
So So like when it comes to Clovis and pre-Clovis, you know, the Clovis site, the first site that had these very distinctive stone tools in it, was discovered in, well, what had probably been known about for a while. It was noted in the early excavations that locals had picked up a lot of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's lost context, and can't be utilized as data anymore. But when they did the excavations on the site in the early 30s, all of the data pointed to 12,000 to 13,000 years old. So you have a 1,000-year window, which is a hell of a long time when you actually break it down. But you have this 1,000-year window, 12 to 13,000 years old. It's associated with these very distinct spear points. So when other Clovis sites started being discovered all over the country that had these very particular stone points, they all had the same data that was pointing to the same date. You know, this 1,000-year window between 12 and 13,000 years ago. So they named it Clovis after the first site, and they said the Clovis people are the first. We're not finding any evidence that says there was anybody that came before Clovis. Well, mind you, this theory came about in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s. And there's a whole generation of archaeologists brought up with this. Clovis is the benchmark. Clovis is what we're looking at. And if we find something that's older than Clovis, we better have some pretty distinct evidence that points to there's older than Clovis. So this guy, Jacques, his last name starts with an M, I can't remember. The guy who discovered Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, which are 24,000 years old. When he postulated this thing that, hey, Clovis are not the first. There are people who are before Clovis. There was a bunch of people who said, yeah, prove it. They didn't say, oh, you're an idiot, and they run him out of the country, with torches and pitchforks and threats of tarring and feathering him. They said, prove it. Show us evidence. And when he went, well, these are the three things I have of evidence, they said, okay, prove that this is legit. Prove that this piece is legit. Oh, you have a single piece of stone that's deeper than everything else. Was it a rodent burrow? It's essentially like a court case. You examine every bit of evidence. You don't want to send somebody to jail because something is not clear or, can be faked or all of these other things. So there was this back and forth, and more sites as technology progressed, starting in the late 60s and going through the 70s and 80s. More and more sites were being discovered where the tools were not quite Clovis. So you suddenly you're going from a ballpoint pen to an upside down zero gravity pen. You're starting to see, oh, there's a little bit of difference here. And this stuff is a little bit deeper. And the carbon tests, the carbon 14 tests are coming back, and the technology is getting better. So you can actually get a better readout. And the dates are starting to go back further. And as much as everybody wants there to be this big dramatic upheaval between the Clovis people and the not Clovis people, and they want to see us out there on the quad beating the crap out of each other, it's not like that. It's okay, here's a hypothesis. Great. For a while, the evidence pointed to that. Now that the evidence is starting to point at other things and other evidence is being brought in, you can then go, oh, okay, so let's think about Clovis. Obviously, the Clovis had to come from somewhere, so what if these are the people that Clovis evolved out of? What if this is the second or third generation of a tool style that was more successful than another? So it's, as much as there's diehard people who say Clovis were the only ones, they're ignoring the fact that so much other evidence and so many other sites have been found that are older. And some of those sites are older on the simplest data, which is the stratigraphy in the site. You know, you're looking and like there's a place called Cooper's Ferry in Idaho. It's a dry area. It's in a creek bed, and for the last 100 years, the flood patterns in that drainage haven't hardly changed. They deposit X amount of soil every single year. So you're looking at the geology of an area, you're looking at the soil context of the area, you're looking at the soil types and the vegetation and all this stuff, the pollen in it, and it's almost like clockwork. And you can count that all the way back. So Cooper's Ferry is 16,000 years old. One of the pieces of charcoal that they tested out of the hearth feature there is 16,500 years old. And that's you know, the chemicals and through the supercomputer have come back and said, hey, this is how old the site is. But just knowing what the soil deposition from that flow of water is, you can see how far back it goes. When you have the Clovis first people look at that, they either try to point out, oh, hey, here's, you know, that's not entirely foolproof. You know, they try to hinge it on, you know, if there's a little bit of doubt, they're going to argue.
Yeah. Which a lot of science is like, because like I could imagine I could imagine like and especially I would imagine, especially like you said yourself, it's more of a humanities, but back in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, I wouldn't even think that they would have like wanted to be called that. Like I would assume like they'd want those like the like, you know, like the British people would be like the rugged adventurer scientist man with his leather hat and Indiana Jones whip. So like, even though it was a humanities and they kind of deep down knew it was, they wanted to be a scientist just because that was like the cool macho title to have.
Yeah.
Now, and it could also be argued that that would also cause them to be a bit more, fuck you, Clovis. The Clovis is, that's what it is, and you can just go off somewhere.
Well, it's not so much the Clovis argument was incorrect back then. Back then, the Clovis argument was it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it kind of had to be because
that's what the evidence showed us.
That's
what the box of stuff showed us. But it's always in this back and forth of new stuff is coming up, new technology is being developed. Kennewick Man is a great example of new technology that was not available when the site was found, that was used to test the site and test the artifacts, being Kennewick Man himself. And they were, you know, a bunch of theories, a bunch of hypotheses and questions about the origins of Kennewick Man were answered in 2013. Those remains were found in 1996.
Explain and they went off Man just for anyone who doesn't get it, understand him completely.
Okay, so Kennewick Man is a body that was found near Kennewick, Washington, by a survey being done by the Army Corps of Engineers. So one of the things that I do as an archaeologist is called cultural resource management, and federal agencies have archaeologists on staff to do this. State agencies do. There are engineering firms and survey firms that contract these jobs. If there's any sort of federal or state work being done, a highway, a bridge, an archaeologist has to be there. Walk it first, do a bunch of research, make sure there's nothing there, and then watch the machine. You know, I've done many hours of standing next to a backhoe with my ears like this because the machine is just so damn loud. And all I'm doing is watching the bucket scoop dirt out of the ground. And if I see something, I stop the guy in the machine and I go and I look at it and I take a couple pictures, write some notes, start digging, you know. Kennewick Man was a set of remains that were found near Kennewick, and it was obvious that they were old. So they were all collected, and it became readily apparent that not only were they just old, they were immensely old. So they went back to the site, they did a little bit more excavation, they found more bones, and they were taking soil samples. And this is why Kennewick Man became such a nightmare, was they got all this stuff, and this Army Corps of Engineer project was going on, and awesome. So we got our stuff, and they go back to the lab, and they're like, hey, we got to go out one more time. And they get there, and the site's gone. The bank is gone. Because the Army Corps of Engineers were like, shit, if this is something big, we gotta get moving. Whether or not that's, that's kind of the urban legend that the Army Corps of Engineers purposely destroyed the site so they wouldn't have to deal with.
So they filled in the hole?
No, they dredged the bank. Like they were wide. This was part of the barge channel. So they did some, they were either doing they either were cutting the bank back and installing riprap, which is the broken pieces of concrete and rock to prevent erosion, ironically enough, or they were just piling this material along the bank to prevent erosion. Like a jetty, a jetty is just a big pile of rock, and the water action can't move it. They do that along the rivers to prevent the river from walking too far out of course, and try to manage the water, which doesn't always work. But they get, the third time or fourth time the archaeologists went back out to this site to establish whether or not there was more to the site or more to Kennewick Man. I mean, he's not complete. But the site was gone. So now all you have is 4 or 5 notebooks worth of data and this skeleton. And because the skeleton is so old, and right off the bat, you can tell it predated Europeans in this country, the indigenous groups are suddenly like, oh, hey, so we claim him. And I think the Salish claimed him, the Salish who live in Washington. I think the Haidaya claimed him. I can't remember which tribes said he's an ancestor and put their hands in the air saying, we want to take him back and bury him properly. But this was a couple years after NAGPRA was introduced, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which was all artifacts and all indigenous remains that are in museums need to go back to the tribes in question for proper disposal or reburial. There's a lot of artifacts that were kept in museums that traditionally would have been destroyed. Like that was their purpose. You make them, you have the ceremony, and then you destroy it. That was the symbology of the thing. The symbolism of that artifact was to be destroyed at the end of the ceremony, and these artifacts never were. So there's some spiritual business needing to be finished there.
Yeah, that's wild.
But when Kennewick Man was being studied, they're going off of bone measurements. They're going off of the one thing that they had available to them as a technique to establish how old he was, and or who he was, what his origins were. And that's where you have they did casts of his skull, and somebody took they had a forensics facial reconstructionist make a reconstruction of Kennewick Man. And the first one came out, he was about the color I am, and he looked like Patrick Stewart. The very sharp bird nose, and he looked very much like Captain Picard. And it was this thing of, okay, is this a joke now?
Yeah,
suddenly they were like, this has gone out the window. But what happened was if you look at some of the pictures of famous chiefs throughout history in the frontier American history, like Sitting Bull, very, very sharp, kind of a bird-like nose. At least I hope it's either Sitting Bull or Crazy Horse, one of the two. Anyway, but if you shaved all their hair off, and they would look a little bit like Kennewick Man. So they changed the coloring of the skin and in the recreation and everything. and they established that he's indigenous. Well, there was such a question. There was such an incredible uproar about his possible lineage. I kid you not. I think they're out of Minnesota. Some white supremacist neo-Nazi gang tried to claim Kennewick Man as a white ancestor because when they recreated him, he looked like Patrick Stewart.
Oh my God.
And they tried to use this claim as some sort of validation and confirmation of white supremacy, and whites were in the Americas first, and everything we did to the indigenous people was justified. Obviously, it's a load of shit.
I wouldn't even see how that would justify anything to begin with. But I mean,
in twisted minds.
Yeah, I know not. Well, that's just because they wanted the clout. I'm an idiot, and I even know that they just wanted to get in the newspaper. It's like white supremacists claim Kennewick Man. That's all they wanted.
But you know, somewhere someone's going to see that and then question what has been told.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is why conspiracy theories exist.
Yeah.
And
I mean, anyway, I still have people down here that are like, how do we know carbon dating's real? I'm like, that's a question for the early 90s, bro. Like we know this shit's solid already.
Yeah, no, we do. But to get back to the, you know, the technology advancing, Kennewick Man was interned to the tribes in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
In 2013, DNA was extracted, I think, from one of his teeth.
Dope.
And they were able to establish that Kennewick Man, and of course, you know, DNA is lots and lots of numbers, and despite the fact that I deal with old stuff, numbers is not my jam. You know, if everybody in the world shares the first 3 blocks of DNA, 1, 2, 3, regardless of what continent you're from, and then 4, 5, 6 dictates you're from Asia, and then 7, 8, 9 dictates that you're from the Americas, based on the combinations of DNA over, you know, 20,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
Kennewick Man was like, his great grandmother was born in Siberia.
Okay, so that's a pretty
genetic tie to Asia. Mm-hmm. So he had haplogroups and genetic markers that tied him to Northeast Asia, you know, the Siberia and the Curly Islands and everything, and then to indigenous peoples from Alaska down to Northern California.
Mm-hmm.
He shared more DNA with them than anything else. So that was like, okay, obviously he's indigenous. Obviously he's close enough to a point in time where that distinct Asian combination of DNA has not left the system yet. Has not
still
been
prevalent enough.
It's been prevalent enough to be obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So not only did it prove that, you know, he was at his age, it proved that he was indigenous, and then his remains went back to, again, I can't remember which tribe, but he was buried. And then it lent a whole crap ton of credence to the Bering Strait theory.
Mm-hmm.
That's the migration route from Asia. Now, and I'm sure you've seen it, there's arguments on the land bridge, the ice bridge, and the Kelp Highway, which are routes to come over. Just remember, though, the distance between Russia and Alaska at its narrowest point is 51 miles. And during, you know, back then, you know, between, let's say, 20,000 and 10,000 years ago, the distance covered by water, because the water levels are so low, is much less than 51 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a huge stretch by boat or by wading, or, you know, low tide. You're able to walk all the way across, like out to Avalon, you know.
Especially that's not for those savages.
That's the point where people are coming into the Americas. Goes in the face of the Solutrean hypothesis, which is something tied to Clovis, which is this attempt to show that you know, ancient peoples from Europe came over the ice and along the ice in boats from Europe. Mm-hmm. Okay, not saying no to that. However, what's the distance? you'd have to be in a little boat with all of your supplies, even with the ice, even following the ice. When people say, oh, you have to walk 55 miles or 53 miles across ice with no food or water, you can carry food and water to cover 53 miles.
Oh, yeah, easily.
You know, can you carry enough food and water to sail, what is it, 2,500 miles, 3,000 miles?
Something like that.
Without a chance of resupply?
Not with anything that we found.
Not with anything we found, no, but remember, we've not found anything suggesting anything more advanced than what we have found.
Yeah.
And what is, traditional. One of the best seafaring craft in the world is a kayak. Who invented the kayak? The indigenous peoples of Alaska and northern North America. And the kayak is, extremely watertight and all of these great things. So much so that we make them today out of plastic and carbon fiber and all this stuff. And we've taken the best design and have improved on it with computer technology. Essentially, we put it in a computer and we've made them, self-writing and all of this stuff. But that's like taking a 1955 pickup truck and doing what we've done to pickup trucks now to it.
Yeah.
You had the best machine for the job right there, and you didn't need to change. So it never changed for millennia in Alaska and the coastlines around Siberia and through the Northwest Territories up there above the Arctic Circle, because you can make it out of materials you had. And nothing better could be made. Nothing better was needed to be made. So, that's one of the things that, when people say, oh, they had to have done this. No, they had the thing that they needed and they didn't need to fix it. They didn't need to improve on it. Modern people have to have that. We have to have air conditioning. We have to have all these fancy things. No, we don't. We're just soft.
Oh yeah, no, we're Jello. We are absolute. Like, I need my AC. No, fuck that. I'm Jello.
But go ahead.
I don't necessarily see. Now, I can kind of tell where you would disagree with Graham Hancock as far as where he was like, we're like 200,000 years. I believe that's around where he's put, like, we had like an extinction level event 200,000 years ago with like solar flares and stuff. And I think there was like a level of radioactive space material like scattered in like a soil sample with like a char where it like burned everything. A couple of extinction level events, I know that would probably fit into the disagreement, but again, besides that, I don't necessarily see the disagreement between the two.
Well, when it comes down to it really comes down to at least I feel the push for things that you can't see.
Yeah.
This 100%, yes, I feel this way. Well, good. Graham Hancock feels this way. He has an idea, and it's his interpretation of what he's seeing in front of him. But here's the thing. Archaeologists, we look at the same material, and because of our educational background and because of the way we've been trained, we're looking at things he's not even recognizing. We're factoring in little facts into that's in the data that change what you're looking at. Like Göbekli Tepe. Let's talk about that. Lots of people say it is a city, and it shows proof that that there was a civilization before civilization. Well, when archaeologists look at Göbekli Tepe and we go, this isn't a city. Oh, we get attacked immediately. Of course it's a city. It's less than 30 acres.
Yeah, if anything, it's like a temple with maybe like
It's a temple.
Yeah,
you know, it's
we can agree it's a temple. It's a
yeah. But you know, when people say, "Oh, it was buried and hidden away," so obviously there's something nefarious. Well, did you look at the site drawings? Did you look at where the deposits are? Because I can tell you by looking at what's been reported. Well, it's obvious why this spot has been buried. There's ruins of something else on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
So they filled this hole in and it became something else. The site was utilized for 2,000 years. It didn't appear looking like it does right now overnight at the beginning of that 2,000 years. It started off as probably a naturally occurring outcrop of rock that afforded some sort of point of navigation, or some sort of very recognizable place where everybody could remember where it is. And that's how it became a holy site.
Mm-hmm.
It's a place that very early people's, hey, you know that pile of rock that grandpa told us about? We can go there and there's always water. There's always game. Something like that. 2,000 years is a long time.
Yeah.
So starting from this pile of rock, which just so happens to be, you know, conveniently obvious, at some point somebody goes, well, this is a place that was given to us by whatever deity, whatever their spiritual outlook on the world is. So what do? Let's pile something. Let's make something for them. So maybe they made it out of wood. Maybe they made it out of bone. Maybe they made something out of leather and they put it there. And the next time they came back, be it a year later or 2 years later, it was gone, destroyed, ruined. Well, then you make it out of the next best thing, the next best thing, next best thing. So then that's where you get the, oh, hey, let's put it inside rock. Let's make a stack of rocks. And it just progresses over 2,000 years to where it becomes this temple. The original meaning of the site is anybody's guess. But to immediately go and say, this is a place where aliens came down, or at the people from Atlantis got together and said, we will build our new world here. Yeah. That's the thing. I don't think a lot of the people who look at these theories or look at these ancient sites and go, it had to be aliens, or it had to be, you know, some, you know, history's lying to us. They're not considering that 2,000 years is actually a really long time.
Yeah. No,
you know, they're used to
massive.
Today, a 25 or 30 story building will go up in 6 months. They're used to that. They're used to, you know, they're used to things.
Years old.
Yeah. You know, they're used to, they don't think further than 10 steps. You know, you've heard the story about somebody looking at a hunter going, why do you go hunting when you could go to the steak and buy, or go to the store and buy steak and no animals were harmed?
Yeah, I don't like that people like that exist and have the right to vote and shit.
well, yeah, no, but and that's kind of extreme, and that's kind of like, God, you know, slap that person for being stupid. But that's a removal in 50 years from a largely rural and agrarian America, with longer than 50 years, 80 years since the Second World War. No, 75.
At least 100 years from hunters markets where they slaughtered 1 billion buffalo a minute to bring tongues, just the tongues.
Just the tongues. Yeah, we're about 150 years from that, but we're less than 100 years from, in the fall, the local butcher shop is supplemented with moose and elk and deer on a regular basis. And that's, I mean, going back to because I'm a car guy, and here's the car analogy. There's hundreds of thousands of them still on the road. You go to a parts store and you say, I need a carburetor kit. The people behind the counter will look at you like you're talking Greek.
Yeah.
Oh, what? And that's and the last carburetor was installed on a car that was sold in in North America in 1994. It was an Isuzu Pup with a 4-popper straight 4 gas engine. My sister had one. That was the last from the factory carburetor sold in North America. That's not even 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And people go, and they don't remember. So when you have something like Göbekli Tepe, which is 12,000 years old, the deepest levels are 12,000 years old. You know, that is out of sight and out of mind for most people's genetic background, let alone their impression
That's like
of
Homo
how they view the world today.
floresiensis. That's like Homo floresiensis.
Well, it's Homo sapien, but you know, but I mean,
no, I'm sorry, I can't remember. I space on when they thought Homo floresiensis was around.
Oh, it was a while ago.
Yeah, it was a lot further than that.
So I mean, there's actually a new skull that was just found in Ethiopia that might rewrite the book on Lucy. Hey,
oh yeah,
more new data.
Y'all
more
love
new data.
Ethiopia.
Oh, Ethiopia is great.
They just keep giving y'all new stuff.
Yeah, that's one of the places I would love to go. I mean, again though, because I'm a North American educated archaeologist, it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult to get there, you know, than if I was educated in Europe, mostly just because it's a little bit different in respect to how archaeology and anthropology is looked at. Yeah. So in the States, like my degree is in anthropology. My focus is archaeology. Mm-hmm. If I graduated from the University of Bristol in England, my degree would be in archaeology. They don't combine them all over there. Here it's combined. And it, you know, you do have to take, at least my curriculum, you did have to take X amount of linguistics, you had to take X amount of cultural, you had to take X amount of bio. So you were an archaeologist, yes, but you had workable knowledge of the other 3 fields in case. And that allows you, I mean, that does allow you to look at when you're on a site, you know, cultural anthropology, you know, the study of culture. Why do people carve things? Why do people carve animal effigies out of stone or bone? Why do they do that? An archaeologist would be like, oh, look, here's a cool thing, and it's this old. A culture anthropologist would be like, we'll be looking at what the potential meaning of that thing is, you know, as well as studying modern day cultures. Why do we Americans like football when football's on? You know, why is that an important part of our culture? So, but yeah, I mean, we look at factors on sites and in the data that dare I say are too boring for, you know, conspiracy groups or Graham Hancock or others who are not trained in the field. We make our interpretations off of the whole picture or the whole mass of data. Meanwhile, others will make their interpretations off of 50% of the data, the flashy bits, you know, the sexy artifacts. You know, what's one of the things that I do regularly is I will be on a site and there will be thousands of artifacts. But the one spear point is the sexy artifact. And that's what the one that everybody will remember. You won't remember that for 4 square miles in every direction, you can't walk barefoot because the chipped stone will slice your feet. That one spear point. Do you remember when that kid found that one spear point? That's the big deal. Mm-hmm. And we do it, you know, just like everybody else. Something cool. Oh yeah, we get excited about it. And then the really like way out in left field conspiracy people, they're the ones that see the headline on Facebook and they go, this is fact. This cannot be walked away from. This is obviously true. You know, the tree roots, the petrified trees, mountains are petrified trees. You know.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing something like that. I'm like, y'all, this ain't Idrisil. Y'all didn't find that.
I know. I know, but you know how many people have seen that headline and clicked on the article and read the 4 or 5 grab you by the collar, shake you by your shirt, exciting sentences, and then ignored everything else they see.
Yeah, let me stop you right there. First of all, you're giving that person too much credit to assume that they read the article in the first place.
I have hope.
First of all, no.
I've also been drinking.
Not have hope. That's a good excuse. That's a good excuse. That person saw the photos, took a screenshot, Facebook messaged it to their little messenger thread, and then they geeked out over Ancient Aliens, which I mean,
which is again
I kind of want it to be true. I want aliens so fucking bad.
I've said that.
God, I want it so
we
bad.
Want aliens to be bad or to be real.
Ooh, y'all want them to be bad.
Well, that would be rad. No, I mean, and this isn't even my line. This is from a professor who does a podcast called Archaeowolf. And it's him and another professor, and then a girl that actually I'm finishing up my thesis right now. She's in the same program I am. They do this podcast together, and essentially it's debunking these ridiculous theories. But the professor in question, Ken Fader, I mean, he's written books on, conspiracy theories and how, breaking down these conspiracy theories on an archaeological level and showing this is why they're not real. But he flat out said, we're nerds. We want aliens to be real.
Yeah, that's all we want.
We would be the first ones to be screaming hallelujah in the streets when they catch a Sasquatch. We're not saying it's real or it's possible because we don't have anything to say it's real or possible in front of us. But on the inside, yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah,
it would be nice.
Especially this year or last year with like all the CIA declassification, the Tic Tac UFO. I'm more than certain you've heard a conversation, maybe Lex Friedman or Joe Rogan with Commander David Fravor about the Tic Tac UFO.
No.
Like, so Joe, obviously, he goes over the more fantastical stuff, but Lex really goes into like the detailed technicalities and like the propulsion. It's like,
sure.
Oh my God. But
when it comes to this, and this just might be my observation, there's a lot of these theories that have been out there for a long time. And for a long time, when somebody said something along the lines of, Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. Lol, LOL. Everybody would look at that and be like, no, bullcrap.
Yeah. Explain that. It's just like, I understand, but the listeners are going to just be like rewinding a couple of times. They're going to think I fucked with the audio. Because now as a Southern...
So the Egyptians in the Grand Canyon.
As a Southern Christian from Alabama, we've heard about Mormons thinking that Jewish people came over here. So we understand that. I also know about a little bit of thing where the Japanese thought Jesus was Japanese or Jewish and came to Japan, and like that's itself is a wild thing. But Egyptians in the Grand Canyons, run that by us.
Okay, so there was a theory, or there was a story that came out in 1909. It was run in one newspaper, the Arizona Gazette, which I don't know if you've ever been to Arizona. But
a reputable news source.
Arizona is like Florida West, is the best way to describe it. But this story was run, and it was Smithsonian finds amazing artifacts in the Grand Canyon from Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon, and it ran in one newspaper. And the guy that the cave is supposedly named after, the one guy who saw everything, Nobody else was able to corroborate what was found except for this one guy, this guy by the name of G.E. Kincaid. When you look up G.E. Kincaid, there's not much. Like to the point of some of the stuff you find about G.E. Kincaid is tied to a copper miner in Minnesota or Michigan who never went south of Ohio or Iowa, never went to the Southwest, just happened to share that name. So, there's a bunch of discrepancies in the article, that don't make any sense. Smithsonian spends all this money. They apparently find all this Egyptian treasure, and then they don't put it on display to get rich donors to give to the museum.
Oh, yeah.
They hide it all. So there's some shenanigans there. There's some unfortunate truth in a couple of things that have also fed the flames of this.
Go ahead, feed the flames.
There's a bunch of geological formations in the Grand Canyon, in and around the Grand Canyon, named after ancient deities. The guy who named them, Clarence Dutton, was an army surveyor and geologist, and he named a bunch of these landforms in the Grand Canyon, and he named stuff all over the country. But when he got to the Grand Canyon, obviously it's grand and majestic, and it makes an impression. There's some landforms like the Isis Temple, which is giant. It's massive. You could fit the entirety of, I think, the city of Cairo would be minuscule compared to the actual size of this landform. It looks vaguely like a pyramid, as do most mountains, wide on the bottom, pointed on top. And he named it Isis Temple because it's got all this majesty and it would be fitting of a goddess, right? And he named another slightly smaller landform because it looked a little bit like Cheops Pyramid in Egypt, which was well known about in 1909. Egypt has been known about since 4500 BCE. It's not a rare. It's not an unknown in 1909. But actually, when Clarence Dutton was naming these things, it was like the 1880s. So he named it Cheops Pyramid. It's not even spelled correctly. The whole area, topographically, on the topographic map, is called Shiva's Temple.
Oh my God.
The whole map section. Shiva isn't an Egyptian goddess.
No.
So what we had there is a case of white men naming things and using their worldview to name them.
They're literally writing fanfic.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you saw something amazing, and then you saw something that brought forth something equally amazing that kind of brought those emotions up again, or brought that excitement up again, you would make a correlation somewhere. Oh, this reminds me of that time here. This reminds me of that this time I saw this. So what happened was this guy, because he was in the military, he probably spent some sort of time overseas. And at that time, we're really good friends with the British, and the British are the ones who are in charge of Egypt. So he may have spent some time in Egypt and seen these things and gone, oh, that's really cool. And then sees these things in the Grand Canyon and goes, these are really cool. I've read these amazing stories, or I've seen these amazing things overseas. This is what has inspired me to name this thing. There's a structure called the Temple of Set. It's a geological monolith along the river in the Grand Canyon there. And it's just this giant projection of rock. It was named by an artist who had extensively traveled the world as well, painting. And because it's relatively close to these unfortunately named landmarks, he's like, oh, well, obviously let's keep in the tradition here. I'm going to name it after the temple, or the Temple of Set. There's nothing to do with actual anything Egyptian.
Yeah.
So anyway, the long and the short of it is that there's some things that have real names, and they're unfortunately scandalous, I guess would be the term. They're unfortunately inspirational. They inspire wild thought. And then there's this story that comes out at the height of Egypt madness. From about 1900, you know, from 1865 to about 1920 is the Industrial Revolution, largely in Europe and in the Americas. Fancy stuff like the telegraph and electricity, and you know, ships that don't take a month and a half or 2 months to cross the Atlantic.
Yeah,
there's information being moved around, and your basic farmer in Iowa can now listen on the radio or read in the paper about King Tut being found.
Yeah.
Sure, it was a month ago when King Tut was found, but this guy can read it in real time.
Yeah.
You know, as close as real time they can get. So information is moving around the world quite quickly. And fantastic things like tombs being found in Egypt, that gets your attention. And then what do newspapers do? Well, the same thing that clickbait websites do now. They'll sensationalize it. Yellow journalism. So these stories would appear, and the stories are obviously so fantastic they can't be real, right? Well, there would be people that would say, hey, this story is so fantastic, let's make it more fantastic, and people will still buy the paper because they want to learn, they want to know. So that's where you get like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. His stories are fantastic, and they're almost a little too fantastic, some of them. But they sold, they were popular, they became radio shows, pulp fiction, pulp radio shows. The idea of Indiana Jones, the caricature of Indiana Jones being the archaeologist, that all rose in the early part of the 20th century, right around this time where in the Arizona Gazette, the Smithsonian takes artifacts out of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
It went to bed. And only the furthest out there people who were like, obviously it was in the newspaper, so it's got to be true, right? Would believe it, and it would come up. And then it came up, it started coming up in television, I think in the mid-90s, because stuff like Unsolved Mysteries was selling. You know, documentaries like Ancient Aliens, what, in 2001, 2002, came out. And you know, Eric von Däniken had written Chariots of the Gods in the late 60s, early 70s. So there's this pattern of wild, fantastic things, and no real way to quantify them because the internet hadn't been invented yet, and the average person couldn't get into actual archaeological files unless you actually went to school, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So there's just like this little undercurrent of, here's what's believed academically, or what's been proven, or you know, here's the scientific level, here's the level of people who don't care, here's the level of people who are believing some pretty crazy stuff because they can't corroborate it with anything else. Well, the Egyptians in the Grand Canyon thing really caught steam because they put it on a TV show like America Unearthed or something. And what did they do? They pointed out that Isis Temple, the mountain or the landform, looks like a pyramid. They don't say, hey, a pyramid's wide on the bottom and pointed on top, same as a mountain, same as a pile of rocks, the same as the pile of dirt that gets dumped out of the back of a dump truck. You know, wide on the bottom, pointed on top.
I mean, and there's not even any like erosion patterns, any clear-cut blocks, any secret caverns, because that shit would have been found by a 16-year-old poking around with the bottle of his dad's whiskey by now, surely.
Oh yeah. Well, that's a factor. Yes, people would have found it by now.
Easily.
There's another factor here that we'll get into that is always overlooked, but it's kind of it's the equivalent of getting hit by a bus when I say it. Anyway, the story kept coming out, and it's now entertainment. Well, there's people that watch those mockumentaries, and go, "Oh, this is obviously true." They want the government to be lying to them. They want to have some sort of mystery.
Well, this is why that kind of stuff popped off in the Industrial Revolution. These men were working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. They needed escapism. They had to escape. So fuck it. The Egyptians were in the Grand Canyon. Let's talk about this shit.
Yeah, no, and that's pretty much, you know, kind of how it has remained. But now you've got a bunch of people who are spreading that story via social media. You know, I mean, I've been tagged on TikTok in probably 30 different creators have said this same, and have used almost the same imagery. The Egyptians were in the Grand Canyon. Here's a magazine. Here's a picture of what they found. Well, and you know, this is because it's second nature to me. I will see that image. I will chase that image down, and I will see where it came from. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to believe a artist recreation based on journals that are missing.
Oh my god! I mean, you know, that's like, you can reverse image search anything on Bing, like that shit.
But
they'd have had you in 2005 when that shit was a pipe dream.
Oh yeah. So there's a lot of people believe in that, and then when you say, oh hey, here's the, you know, there's no Egyptians in the Grand Canyon, and here's why, they look at you and they're like, oh well, you're obviously wrong. Okay, fine. But and I actually did an 8-part series or 9-part series on TikTok where I pointed out the actual proof as to why there's no Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. You know, all of these monuments, they don't have cut stone. Yeah. Not only do they not have cut stone, there's no quarries or roads or infrastructure to build them. Mm-hmm. There's no trash. I mean, archaeology is very much looking at ancient people's trash, you know, and treasure's cool. Yeah, why not? Treasure's cool. You will get more information about ancient people by digging through their trash or the trash pits than you will about the golden jewels that are in a temple to whoever. You will, you know, that's okay, cool. All of that stuff tells us the same thing. This god was important.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason it's a constitutional, damn near a constitutional right to dig through people's trash. The police easily find out more info on a guy they're looking at through his trash.
There was an experiment done, social anthropology experiment done, I think in the early 90s, and I can't remember the professor who did it, but I think he was out of Berkeley or UCLA. Anyway, he sent a bunch of his students out and he interviewed people in a prominent neighborhood, and it was essentially talking about their vices. Do you smoke? Do you eat junk food? Mm-hmm. You know, how much coffee do you drink a day? Do you drink beer? Do you drink wine? You know, all this stuff. And some of those things people might not be cool saying. You know, how many packs of cigarettes do you smoke a day? Just half, because any more sounds like you have a problem.
Yeah.
So what they would then do is that the students would then, like a day or two later, go through that same person's trash. Yeah. It's out on the alley.
Let me go through your trash. It's public property.
And they took all the artifacts, took all the trash out and laid it out. And you know what they established? Every single person was lying about their consumption numbers. You know, the person who says I drink 2 beers a night is going through a 24 pack in 2 days.
Lord.
The lady who says I smoke 3 cigarettes a day is smoking 4 packs a day. Mm. And all it showed was that people lie, one, but it also showed that there's a lot of information that can be gleaned from waste.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I can pick up a bone. This is up at the historic ghost town that that's managed by the office I work for here, the land agency's office. It's called Garnet Ghost Town, At its height, it had 13 saloons for 1,000 people. But it also served a triangle of smaller encampments, towns, and miners and everything for 5 to 10 miles in every direction. So you had probably 20,000 people that would come to this town over the course of a month to resupply, drink, visit the ladies in the red light district, have civilization before they went back out to their little mine claims out in the middle of nowhere where their only friends are black bears. So you have 13 saloons along this main road. In 1912, most of it burns down. Those old buildings, they were tinder boxes when they were built. They were tinder boxes 12, 13 years later. And they're tinder boxes now, the surviving structures. But we have, you can see in the picture of the main street, and you can extrapolate kind of where you're standing. And you know that right where we park our trucks used to be a saloon. Cool. Well, gophers dug up a hole right there, and they kicked a bunch of stuff out in the back dirt. And archaeologists start picking through the back dirt, picking up these broken garbage, broken glass, broken ceramic. I can tell you, based on 5 artifacts that came out of that hole, that the saloon where I park my truck, that was built there in 1885 and burned down in 1912, the guy in the kitchen did not have a bone saw, because every single bone that come out of the ground, beef bone, was cut with a wood saw. You can see the teeth marks. They had somebody there who was a well-educated and accomplished baker, because I found pie weights in the back dirt.
And what is that?
A pie weight's a little like an unfinished marble of ceramic. And essentially what it does is you take your pie crust and you put it in the dish, and then you use the pie weights to substitute the weight of the filling.
Oh, okay.
You then put it in the stove for a little bit. You get it tempered. You get it cooked most of the way through. You take it out. You empty the pie weights out, and then you put your fruit filling in, and it doesn't saturate.
It's not soggy and decolored and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Got it. So you had someone that was not only educated enough to know that needed to be done, but that he had the tools to do it just because it was there.
That he had the tools to do it, that they did enough business and they had enough clientele coming through to justify having that.
Yeah, justify the quality, justify the competition.
But you know what baking is? Baking's a woman's job back then. They have a woman employed in the kitchen as well as a man. So it's either the saloon owner and his wife, or it's the saloon owner and he's got a bartender and the bartender's wife, who they live upstairs. They live in the little cottage up on the hill, but you can, looking at these couple artifacts, you can tell that you could get a decent meal, because also the bones themselves were not crappy cuts of bone. They were pretty decent. Not T-bone, not top sirloin, but not pig's feet. So you could get a decent meal with a dessert, with some sort of baked pastry or bread or anything like that. And you can tell that establishment probably did pretty well, which, if you do well, you can offer your clientele more. So you then in turn get more clientele, because if the place across the way serves what's called tobacco whiskey, which is a horrible thing.
Oh God, that doesn't even sound nice.
And that's all they serve. But you serve 3 kinds of whiskey and wine and 2 kinds of beer. Where are people going to go? The shitty liquor place or your place? Well, if you have 30 people come in every single day and they spend $5 a day, and your operating cost is $100, you can start putting more money into your business, and the quality of your stuff goes up. And that's information that can be seen in the archaeological record when you break a fancy plate. You know, you might not care that you broke your fancy plate because, oh, you can afford a new one, so you throw it away. You know, oh, this has a chip in it, they'll throw it away. I've found full intact plates, intact vessels, and they have little divots out of them, like you clanked them in the cupboard and it chipped them. They'll throw those away because, oh, hey, I can buy new ones. In the 1890s, in a ghost town in Montana, or a mining town in Montana, where it was a 4-day trip to the nearest big city, people are like, oh, I make enough money and we're connected enough to civilization, I can throw this whole big thing away.
Imagine a 4-day trip disconnected.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, a 4-day trip is driving New York to California.
4-hour trip for me to Atlanta is no.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like I mean, you're in Georgia. That's small time compared to here. 4 hours is you know, that's nothing.
Yeah,
that's nothing
no, well,
here.
I'm in Alabama, but yeah, no.
Over
here,
okay.
4 hours is no.
Yeah. No, my dad told me a story once. He picked up a hitchhiker, I guess in the early 80s. And the guy was like, I need a ride. And my dad was like, I can only drive you a little ways up the highway here. And the guy was like, well, how far is that? And my dad goes, about 250 miles. Because it was, you know, here, that kind of distance is, it's just factored in. You don't even think about it hardly anymore.
Where the hell are y'all driving around? 250 miles is a stretch.
I think it was from Miles City to Lewistown, which is nothing. There's nothing there. It's open. There's antelope. Some of that country, that when you get out there and you squint and you can't see the road anymore, it looks exactly the way it did 50,000 years ago. There's no people. There's nothing. In fact, there's one of the reasons why some of those counties out there have such high death toll on the highway is that car accidents happen and it's 3 or 4 hours before anybody else sees you.
Yeah, that's not a place to wreck your Tesla.
Yeah, oh, break your Tesla or hit a deer or, you know. But yeah, you know, distance is, if you can see the connectivity between places in the world too in the archaeological record, which is really, really interesting because, like, there's a town called Coloma, which is near Garnett. It was a silver mining town. Mm-hmm. There was one big mine called the Mammoth, and it was owned by a woman. Her husband owned one share in the company and was the spokesperson. Because in the 1880s and 1890s, you didn't do business with women. You know,
so you had to have a share to be on the paper.
So,
yeah.
Well, he was an employee more than husband. You know, but that mine made so much money that at the height of the mysterious Orient, they took a 6-month tour through Asia, Japan, China, and all these souvenirs that were brought back. You can see real porcelain, Chinese porcelain, Japanese, you know, pewter castings, you know, little ornamentation made out of metal and everything, that are from Asia in a mining town in Montana. That's, if you looked at that with no context and no information about that family, you would be like, the hell is this? And you might paint really incorrect pictures. That's one of the things that we do have to go and look at, because there's a great example, actually had something to do with Coloma. Is there was the last resident of Coloma died in 1962, and he was an old blacksmith. and there were local legends that he was a cross-dresser. Lived by himself, and it was local legends that he was a cross-dresser. And then there was some sort of local legend that because his wife was buried nearby, he would never leave the mountain. Mm-hmm. And he never threw anything away. And when his cabin was pretty much fell in on itself and most of it's demolished, if you started digging in there, you would find the ribbing and the hooks from corsets. You would find garter buckles. You would find buttons that are indicative to women's dresses. What picture, if you didn't know any of those legends, would that tell you? Here's a very small amount of male clothing and a lot of women's clothing.
He was simple and he liked dressing his wife up.
Or it was a whorehouse.
Or it's a whorehouse, yeah.
Or it was the house of a widow. There was no men involved at all.
Yeah.
That's why you have to look at everything and take everything and go, okay, what are our 5 options here? Because here's option A, it was a brothel. Option B, the family was rich and the woman had a lot of things. Option C, it was a woman living by herself. Option D, it was the guy who had a lot of his wife's belongings. Or option E is he was a cross-dresser. And it could be any one of those until you find more evidence that points to one or the other.
Bro, I'm running to the cross-dresser. I just like that. I just like that a lot more. It's like I think it was like Empire of the Summer Moon. I was listening to that audiobook, and they were talking about how like a army private married a woman, and then she died while he was out on deployment, and it turns out she was a cross-dresser the whole time. I was like, bullshit. Huh. Like that like Custer time.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
and then he hung himself, and like when everybody found out and shit. Like I was like,
it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I was like, so I mean, because that was either a very, very good looking, feminine wise man, or the females back then were ugly.
Well, it's
for a dude, because think about it, it's like, how are you not going to catch 5 o'clock shadow back in Custer days and like get away so a little bit of stubble had to be something that was it's okay, it's weird, but whatever. Or that person just had no masculine
it's entirely
features
possible.
At all.
The other thing is too is that as much as historically when you look at gender identity and sexual identity and stuff, mm-hmm. That's another one of those things. It might not have been the hubbub we make it today, or the hubbub that's been made about it in the last century. These little social nuances that nobody cared 100 years ago, nobody cared 30 years ago, but now people care. It's amazing what all it does is take one, the Dr. Seuss books, people getting bent out of shape about the couple of books that are not getting printed anymore, and the company is literally like, nobody reads these.
Yeah,
we're not going to print them anymore.
I had to explain that. Like I had to explain that to a family member. It's like, they're trying to cancel Dr. Seuss. Nothing's wrong with Green Eggs and Ham. I'm like, bro, do you even know some of the passages? It's like, no, what are you talking about? It's like they were talking because my wife is Vietnamese, so like the one passage where it was talking about people with slanted eyes from towns you can't pronounce. He's like, wait, that was a fucking what now? I was like, that's what they were getting rid of. He's like, oh no, fuck that thing. Yeah. I thought they were getting Green Eggs and Ham.
Yeah.
Like, no.
And that's another thing. When Dr. Seuss wrote that book, that was it. That was how people talked. That was how people talked. That was socially acceptable. And again, that's one of those things where it's kind of ridiculous on trying to judge somebody in the past by today's standards. We're growing and moving ahead every day.
Yeah.
That book was written 60 years ago. It's 60 years in the past. Stop trying to hold a dead guy to today's standards and stop getting bent out of shape about it.
Yeah.
Lots of people getting bent out of shape about our boy Winston Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of wasted effort. It should be acknowledged, yes.
Oh, absolutely.
But holding him to the standard of today is it's almost like a waste of time.
I mean,
at least
almost,
I go.
That's almost like if someone holds anyone to the standards of 50 years from now, we're probably going to be unspeakable things.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You're telling us that you allowed another country to exist that locked up a religious minority? You didn't take them into your own government? What kind of heartless monster are you? You bought an iPhone that was made by people who the Foxconn buildings had to be laced with anti-suicide netting, and you bought that phone willingly? You're a monster.
I know, right?
It's like, we're fucking monsters.
Yeah, and that's people's interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice, though, people are also ignoring a lot of interpretations and a lot of things when it comes to people because it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
As much as I don't know if we want to get into the conversation about how about color or ethnicity, Europeans, the slave trade was terrible. The slavery in the New World was terrible. What happened to the indigenous cultures and the indigenous peoples of these continents and continents around the world? Horrifying.
Yes.
Europeans are not the only ones who did such things.
No, not at all.
We're the most recent.
Yeah. Now, arguably, we were the most ruthless by the fact of chattel slavery, the implementation of breeding and breeding slave, but that's about as far as it goes. But yes,
where do you think they got that idea?
To my knowledge, that was more or less invented by the European slave trade, but that's to my knowledge.
Well, where though? Because for a long time, Europeans dealt in European slaves, and Africans dealt in African slaves.
Yes.
And Asians dealt in Asian slaves. That's one of the things that when people look at the slavery question, there's a lot of people that immediately think, when they think of slavery, what do they think? They think of the American South picking cotton, and that's their only point of reference.
Yes.
Even though Russell Crowe starred in one of the best slave movies ever, Gladiator.
Well, even then, that had its own kind of escape route for freedom, though. Even though it was probably not going to happen, but Russell's Crowe kid had an opportunity by his father's success to get out of it. Regardless of how many bags of cotton you were to pick, you were probably more likely to have your children enslaved because they might be better cotton pickers because of you.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, there's generations and generations of slaves that exist everywhere.
Yeah. And there's more slaves that exist now, but it's all a weird subject that just,
it's extremely weird. When people go, oh, we enslaved all of Africa. You know who is credited with starting the Atlantic slave trade is the Dutch. The Netherlands are that big.
Yeah.
How is a boat full of 60 guys going to subdue a nation? No, it's because all the neighbors who didn't like those people or had some sort of tribal argument sold them.
Yeah.
Defeated them in battle, took them prisoner. Oh, those weird little dudes who are really pale and they turn red in the sun? Yeah, they said they'd give us things for these guys that we don't like, and we want to take their land anyway.
Yeah.
So infighting was taken advantage of. But there were a lot of people
there was a lot of slavery back then in Africa anyway. You know, one of the biggest slave networks was through Africa into the Middle East and into Asia along the Silk Road. There was slavery everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's so obvious, though, when Europeans are doing it to people of other colors or other ethnic origins. Again, that kind of polarizing, here's an obvious bad guy, here's an obvious good guy.
Yeah.
You go further back in history, and it's not that obvious.
No.
You know, when people talk about
geopolitical stuff to make sense of it.
Yeah. When people talk about the horrible things that were done, you know, that were done to indigenous peoples, yes. Make sure every avenue is looked at, though, because there's legends on how bad certain tribes were to other tribes.
Yeah.
You know,
that again goes with like how the Native Americans were looked upon here in the Americas. It's like, yes, we killed a lot of them off with smallpox and other diseases. Yes, we definitely drove them off their lands, Trail of Tear style. But the Comanches also mercilessly slaughtered everything in their path.
Yeah, you know, some of it is hyperbole, though. You got to remember, you know, you have to make your enemy, quote unquote, less than you in some fashion.
Yes.
However, what I'm meaning to get at is that, you know, there's everybody, nobody's perfect.
No.
And when you look at history, you have to look at it through as neutral glasses as you possibly can and acknowledge everything. And a lot of people don't do that. You know, when people say that, you know, white people were just the worst. Hi, have you met my friend Genghis Khan?
Oh yeah, that's
40 million people.
A third of the genetic population.
Yeah.
Did
you know that you
like
can?
That.
Did you know that you can see in soil samples a drop in the CO2 production?
Oh yeah, just because nobody was making charcoal or burning shit. Just
they weren't breathing.
Oh yeah,
that's the CO2 in the air from people inhaling and exhaling.
Shit, I didn't even take that into account. That will definitely outpace any kind of fire. Fuck.
So
breathing.
So yeah,
bullshit.
Yeah, it's insane.
Oh fuck.
But you know, you get into this, you know, historically looking at some of this stuff, and I kind of forgot where we were going with that.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to people, you know, putting facts out there, you got to look at all of them, and you have to take into consideration stuff. You know, like you can't look at the world 1,000 years ago and judge it by today. 1,000 years ago was Genghis Khan, where chopping ears off of 40 million people or 10,000 people in a city, in the city of Asher, you know, as proof that you killed them. That was every day. You know, so are you going to judge that soldier by doing not only what his father did, but what his sons would do, and by what he knew by today's standards, after we've had another 1,000 years to learn?
No.
And be better?
That's up to the sociologist.
Yeah. You judge today's people by today's standards. I'll even be generous. You judge the last 20 years by today's standards.
Oh yeah, no. If you try,
but you really can't. Like when you look at cartoons, when you look at media. When I was a kid, I watched Looney Tunes with Speedy Gonzalez, who is the poster child for every single horrible stereotype about Mexicans. You know, I watched, you know, cartoons where, like, Tailspin. Tailspin was so stereotypical about stuff. Here's the short little soulless piggies. They're all from Russia. Here's the mysterious panda people who are this looming threat that we can't do anything about. Oh, here's China. I mean, those were the representations of these characters back then. Mm-hmm. Because, the writers are getting it from the... Sorry, there's something in my eye.
No, you're good.
Where the writers are getting these, their inspiration from, to the point where they might not even be recognizing it. It's just indoctrinated into how they view the world. The Chinese are always mystical. They grew up with that mindset and they put it down on a piece of paper and they don't even realize they're doing it. That's just how they visualize.
It's not even what they would consider a negative stereotype, even though it is by today's standards. It's just what they saw. It's like everybody saw that.
It's their interpretation.
Yes.
Are you going to villainize them for an interpretation that we today find offensive, but wasn't offensive years and years and years ago?
I mean, you can, but it doesn't mean you should spend too much energy on it.
Doesn't do anything, though.
No, it does nothing.
One of the things that I pointed out. Sorry, go ahead.
I saw you could literally use that energy to take that. You could literally take that energy and focus it towards, let's say, the Uyghurs. How about you help them out? Just start throw your energy towards that.
Yeah.
Write your little Facebook post and then go, on the subject of the Chinese, there's an entire subset of religious subcultures being wiped out by the current government. Let's run that.
Yeah, let's fix that. The conversation about race and color, and I got a huge amount of hate for this when I posted something about it.
Yeah.
But I essentially was like,
easy. It's so easy.
It is so easy, but it's also kind of this, well, it's so obvious, why refer to two races by their color and you can't refer to any other races by their color?
We know why.
Well, yeah, but why is it still okay? Why is it okay for people to say black people or white people? You can't use red. You can't use yellow. You can't use brown. You will get beat up. You will get in trouble for such things. But you can still use black and white. It's an overgeneralization.
Well, to my understanding, especially as someone down here in the South, where I'm dead center of the black belt. To my understanding, and it took me a minute to realize that, or to have it explained to me, even myself, I'm like, I think I'm German, I'm Irish, and I'm Native American, just like kind of a mix up there. But I have a black friend, he has no idea what he was. So the only thing he can identify with is his color, along with the hundreds of thousands of millions of other people that can literally only identify with their colors. And even if they was like, I may have the facial features of like a Zimbabwean, they're not going to identify with me because I'm not Zimbabwean, I'm American. So,
well, it's the same way you could go to Germany and say,
I'm not identifying with.
I'm American. I'm German, and they're going to look at you and be like, no, you're an American. Go away.
Yeah, no, you're an American.
What I was trying to get at, though, is this utilizing a color as a description is not necessarily incorrect because it's so ingrained in society.
Yeah.
But utilizing that color as some sort of detriment.
Yeah, that's
there's an unfairness that goes back and forth with that, which leads to why are we using color at all? I'm perfectly okay with being called a European American. My ancestry comes from Europe. The moment I do this thing, though, it's probably going to tell me some crazy thing that I never knew was in the family tree, and I will be forced to be confused for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But it's it's definitely one of those weird things that just goes up and down that you can't. People spend a lot of time focusing on it, like we just have.
Yeah, exactly.
and it may or may not get anywhere, but it does color. It does color the lenses that people are looking at the world through. So when you have like one of the things that's come up again, it's come up with the Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. And again, this is one of those things. The Egyptians in the Grand Canyon rewrites a little bit of history, rewrites it. And it gives a little bit of power to somebody. And the power that it gives to people is to people of African descent, because the Egyptians are from Africa. Mm-hmm. So now there's a bunch of people who are like, oh, well, hey, this is obvious proof that we were in the Americas, and all the white people who are telling us that's not true are wrong.
Yeah.
Well, you know who's standing up and getting bent out of shape about this? The indigenous people.
Yeah.
You know, especially tribes in the Southwest. There's content creators that I follow on TikTok who are from the Southwest, and they stand up and they say, hey, no, you know, fine, don't believe the white guy. Believe the indigenous person whose people have been here for thousands upon thousands of years. The Egyptians never were here. We don't remember them. And that many Egyptians would have made an impression.
Yeah.
You know, we never got anything from the Egyptians in respect to technology, genetic makeup, you know, anything like that. All of these cultural things that would have been presented by the Egyptians if they had been here. And there's so many people who want to buy this or want to believe in this pseudo theory about the Egyptians being in the Grand Canyon, that they're telling the indigenous people that they're wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, there's one where, you know, the Polynesian people who colonized Hawaii, their descendants today are being told that their ancestors were black by black people who are following this theory that Africans made it to the Americas before Columbus, mm-hmm. or they spread out east from Africa first. Mm-hmm. And while everybody does have a genetic tie to Africa, that's where the humanoid species evolved, mm-hmm. and then spread out. Mm-hmm. You know, yes, there's that, but people aren't looking at it that way. No. They're looking at it as modern people did this.
Yeah.
And that's what's just causing this, you know, rock tumbler of back and forth that really doesn't get anybody anywhere. And it causes more conflict than not, because there's people who, when you say that, instead of going, this person is, and I probably should listen to them because they are an archaeologist or they are an expert in history. Mm-hmm. They're immediately going to be like, oh, the white guy's telling us something, we're going to not listen to him.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to, I was talking to another creator on TikTok yesterday. Somebody tagged me in one of her mutuals posts, mm-hmm. and both of them are indigenous. Both of them are indigenous and both of them are women. And I got tagged by somebody who wanted me to either clarify or mansplain.
Ooh.
And I didn't see it because I was not friends with the one until yesterday, until after I was asked. Mm-hmm. And I told this other creator, I was like, it's no big deal. I mean, I didn't see it. If you were a little bit snarky, hey, cool. It's not a problem. But I have already had to reach out to other creators whose posts I've been tagged in. And now I'm mutuals with them because it was, you know, we're in the same boat. It's where I've been tagged because I'm white and I'm a man to explain what the woman said, or to confirm what the woman said.
So the person just like assumed that you could, or that they would listen to the argument if you made it.
Well, yeah, and they like want me to, and then they want me to confirm it Like, oh, this woman made a very good point, but we're going to ask the man.
Oh my God.
And if it was a completely neutral exchange, like this person has said this thing, I don't know their background, but it's an archaeological question. I would like the archaeologist to confirm this.
Now
that I feel is okay.
Yeah. Now, did they make that distinction?
No.
They didn't specifically say, because that would have been their out. That would have been
the out. But that
they said they wanted the man to explain it. They didn't want the archaeologist who just so happened to be a man.
Well, you know, the thing was that I was just tagged. I wasn't asked to re-explain it. I was just tagged in it. And the insinuation was there that because I'm a man.
So they kind of said it, but they didn't say it for
or because I'm white, I would know more. And it's, you know, I mean, and I said that to this creator. I was like, look, I've already had to reach out and apologize because I've been tagged in a number of posts where people want me to explain something. And then I followed it up with if it just like I said, if it was a completely neutral, this person is an archaeologist, this person isn't, I want the archaeologist to confirm it. So I don't believe the yammerings of someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. And you left gender and color and ethnicity and everything out of it. Then I would feel, I would feel not necessarily obligated, but I wouldn't, you know, completely avoid the idea
less
of
awkward.
Adding to, or clarifying. But yeah, no, you can't. We don't think that way.
Wild.
So I mean, I don't know why.
Yeah. So
you know,
to go back on the Egyptians and the Grand Canyons. I say this not trying to fight for the argument of Egyptians in the Grand Canyons, but there are records, fossil records of horses existing in the Americas before the Europeans brought horses over. Now, that could obviously be explained as they were a prey animal being chased by the indigenous people that possibly came before the second wave of modern indigenous people, if you want to run that scenario. But couldn't it also be, and I'm not saying that they built a pyramid or anything, because I mean, again, there's no quarries, there's nothing like that. But before pre-pyramid Egyptians, couldn't it be said that it's a possibility that they came over, brought the horses with them, they all died off, and it was so long ago that pretty much everything had like just disintegrated? Because even I think there's an anime that I really like, Dr. Stone, where all of humanity turns into statues, and then 10, 20, 30, 40,000 years later, they kind of like break out of the stone, and then when literally everything is just gone. There's nothing, there's no computers, no steel buildings, everything's just disintegrated. Now, especially with like a civilization that didn't like develop a system, like maybe they were kind of like a little more hunter-gathery, like because they knew of it, they were just like explorer types. Is it what would you need? And obviously you probably wouldn't have it because it would have been so long to fit that direct timetable. What would there have need to be for that to be like something culpable and believable to an archaeologist, a historian, all that?
Something blatantly distinctive to Egypt.
Well,
Egyptian
that would have been
tools.
It would have been pre-Egypt. It would have been like, because that's my argument. My argument has been like, what if it was 50,000 years before pyramids Egypt?
Well, 50,000 years before pyramids Egypt, there's still stone tools that are in Africa and Egypt and Northern Africa that are distinctive from the stone tools that exist in Europe right across the Mediterranean.
Okay.
They're tool types. There's a thing called tool cultures.
Okay.
Where we haven't found any people. The remains, the physical meat and bone has not survived.
Yes.
But like the Acheulean tool culture is a couple million years old. And they are recognized by the very distinctive tools that were made by these people, you know, for their level of advancement. And again, this kind of like the kayak, you know, for their level of advancement, they didn't need to make anything better.
Yeah.
So this tool culture, this tool style survived for millennia because it worked. It was able to be created by the materials at hand. And it was something that just, you know, it didn't need to advance, you know, and once big animals die out, the megafauna dies out. And this is long before this is long after the Acheulean culture disappeared and those tools fell out of use and became something else. But as your environment changes and as you travel, you adapt slightly. So the Acheulean tool culture turned into something else. It didn't disappear. It didn't end. Like they didn't just go, oh, this is a piece of crap, and suddenly start making this new thing overnight. It was phased out. Same thing with the Clovis tools. Clovis is great. Clovis is about the same time that mammoths and megafauna still exist in the Americas. And right about the time that Clovis stops being in the archaeological record is the time period where you don't have to hunt bison antiquus and mammoth and woolly rhino and the giant sloths anymore. Your technology changes because you don't need a giant spear when you're harvesting elk. You need something that's a little bit better ranged, so your spear points become smaller. You know, the atlatl is invented, so you just use a big arrowhead. Oh, then bow and arrow is figured out after trial and error and, you know, stuff. Well, you can't shoot an arrow with a big head on it because it's going to be out of balance. You make the head smaller. You change the shape for better penetration, et cetera, et cetera. The technology changes based on your needs back then. Humans back then were very, you know, here's the 5 things that we're worried about. And it's the only 5 things we're worried about. You know, food, sex, shelter, being able to find food. So there's your territory. And, you know, just basic survival against your enemies. So which is where kind of where weaponry, you know, where the weapons technology, hunting and the defense is where the weapons technology and the tool technology kind of, that's where the rise is and the requirement for it. But if you're a tribal group and you're not fighting anybody, you don't need to really, your technology doesn't need to change. You know, up until the Spanish arrive in the Americas, pretty much, and you can see it in South America and you can see it in North America, the peoples fighting against each other are all pretty well matched. Nobody has the upper hand. Everybody's got bows. Everybody's on horseback. You know, it comes down to the human factor. The Apache are scary. Why? Well, because culturally they do A, B, and C differently. It's the same thing as like the Spartans in Greece. The Spartans devote their entire culture to war. They're no different physically, meat and bone. They're no different than the Athenians or the Thebans or the Argonians or the you know, anybody else. But because their culture is aimed towards war and they've made an effort to refine war, that's what makes them so scary. But the technology is all the same. You know, if they were all Athenians, if they were all, you know, you set them all up with the same strengths, nobody's actually going to defeat the other one, you know, with some sort of massive victory. It's all going to be just kind of a stalemate because everybody's kind of the same. When you change a cultural thing, that's where you have some sort of advantage. But then what happens when somebody brings in gunpowder or steel or versus bronze. When you have the invention of something else, suddenly everybody wants that something else, and it becomes less about, that's why technology changes, is, because somebody else has a thing. If there's no need for a new thing, if there's no new thing, people just settle into a program and they exist. And that includes travel. If you have to extend yourself beyond your territory, there better be a really damn good reason. The Egyptians would have to cross one of two oceans. In doing so, even if it's 50,000 years ago, before Egyptians were Egyptian, you would still have to have them travel through populations and through areas that they would interact with. There's your trail. There's your trail of breadcrumbs. If you had, let's say 5,000 years ago, the Egyptians left Egypt, or a group of Egyptians left Egypt, and they went, let's say they went the same way that everybody came to the Americas. They go up towards the Bering Strait. You would have genetic material being shared via trade, via slavery, via, whatever, between Egypt and Siberia. You would have that technology along that entire route as well, because you trade technology. I don't have any gold, I don't have any grain, but I can teach you how to build this device that'll take down a deer at 100 paces. That's worth something. So you would see technological advancement, you would see, or you would see material culture. Look at these guys. They're wearing, what are those? Sandals, you say. How do you make them? Someone's going to pick up on a sandal. Oh, shoot, these guys walk 20 miles. I can only walk 5. This little thing you put on my feet, I can walk 20 miles now. Mundane little bits of technology like that disseminate out through everybody you talk to. You and I having conversation. How far away are you? Let's say 3,500 miles. Let's say 3,000 miles away. I'm sharing with you information that you didn't know. You can then tell somebody that tomorrow. You go to work on next Tuesday, and you tell somebody in the break room, hey, I heard this really cool thing. That's the dissemination of an idea or knowledge. Same thing. How did ironworking takes a forge. How did ironworking get anywhere around Europe? Well, they didn't bring all the stuff with them. They didn't bring the entire forge with them. But somebody who knew how to make a forge, that's who was able to build a forge in the new place. So you would have these very distinctive things following all the way up, and then they'd cross, and then it would come all the way down. And you would see this distinctive influence in along the path, every single landscape that the Egyptians would walk through. 5,000 years ago, nobody had horses. Roughly 5,000 years ago. The Batai would have had horses. And the Batai are the tribal peoples who live on the Russian steppe, pretty much. They're the ultimate ancestors of like the Scythians and the steppe peoples north of like Iran and in the like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and all those countries up there, where the horse becomes a part of their culture. It's domesticated first as food, then possibly as food, food, resource material, leather and such, and then milk and cheese, as humans domesticate animals and they discover, oh, hey, this animal makes the same thing that human females make. We can consume this. It doesn't hurt us. Perfect. by the time people are riding horses and using horses as what we would recognize a horse is used for, packing or riding. That's 4,000 years ago. So you're looking at 1,000 years where people are eating horses and they're not using them for anything else. The Egyptians wouldn't have had that. So they wouldn't have been able to bring over horses anyway. Horses, when the megafaunal extinction happens, horses go extinct. However, it could be postulated that populations of horses lasted longer because they're not huge. They're small animals compared to a mammoth.
Yeah.
Their resource needs are more akin to bison, in respect to the amount they need to eat. It's very possible that populations of horses existed in the Americas until 6,000 years ago. Small populations, and they eventually became genetically unviable because they were so spread out. They couldn't reproduce anymore because at that point you're having everybody's, they're all related in some form that sterilizes the gene pool, and those populations die out. Or those populations do run afoul of humans who are like, oh, look, steak, and they eat them. They don't allow that resource to propagate. They harvest too many at a time, or because they're slower than deer, oh, we'll take that one first because they're slower than deer. If you do that once, okay. If you do that twice, fine. If you do that 10 times in a week and you have a population of 100, what's going to happen? You're going to exhaust that resource very quickly. And those remains haven't been found because in the context of preservation, they just didn't survive. But stone tools have been found in the Americas with horse DNA on them, where they were used to hunt horses. There's stone tools that were found in Colorado with camel DNA. From North American.
That just carries more credence to my Egyptian theory with the camels. I'm kidding.
Why?
I'm kidding.
Well, camels existed just at the same time period. Some of the oldest genetic populations of camelids are South America. Guancos. Or what's the other ones? Alpacas. They're camels. Llamas are camels. They're all camelid creatures. They're small. They're fast. They evolved for that landscape, the food that's available. They changed. The ones that survived, whatever predation there was, or whatever climate change there was, they're the ones that are the new masters of the gene pool. So if you have a population of 10 and 2 are 30% smaller than the others, but the other 8 get killed off quickly, it's those 2 that are going to continue to propagate. And they're genetically small. They have that genetic sequence that says you're going to be little. And that's how they survived. They changed accordingly to their environment. The Catalina Islands off the coast of California, dwarf mammoths. Their population was trapped when the seas rose, and they existed till like 8,000 years ago. There's a population of mammoths that, and I pointed, somebody asked me this question, and I did do a TikTok on it. When Khufu's pyramid was built, it was almost 1,000 years old when the last mammoths on Earth died out.
Oh, that would have been so awesome. Little mini mammoths.
They lived on St. Paul Island off the coast of Alaska and Wrangel Island north of Siberia. And they island dwarfism. It became conducive. If you're smaller, you're going to eat less. You're going to need less energy. those are the ones that would propagate. They died out because they genetically were no longer viable. You know, or in the case of St. Paul Island, some sort of, because it's in an active geologic zone, it's on the Ring of Fire. Some sort of geological possibility could have happened that contaminated the water supplies with salt water. So they, you know, gradual, not a necessarily an overnight event, but you know, you have a point where those populations that never saw humans after the waters rose, they may have never known what a human was. They died out at the same time. The pyramids are the biggest pyramid at Giza is 900 years old. So it's entirely possible that horses existed in North America for longer than the megafaunal extinction. Just not what they would have been used for as we think of them. You know, you look at a wild Mustang and there's still people that go, oh, you put a saddle on that and you ride. No, you eat that. You know. The other thing is that this is a very specific place to come to the Americas. It's a very specific place.
Yeah.
It took thousands and thousands of years for humanity, as we know it as a species, to spread throughout the world. I mean, we're talking 30,000 years between Africa and Siberia, which is not that big of a distance in the grand scheme of the world, especially considering you can walk, you can circumnavigate the earth in like 3 years at walking pace if you just walk. You know, it's very possible to travel great long distances on foot. It's not a, you know, as long as you have enough supply or ability to resupply, you can walk until you die. You know, you can walk indefinitely. These populations are not walking specifically to get to a place. They're expanding and they're moving based on requirement. So generation A stops in a river valley and it's nice. Generation Q has to move because that valley is no longer capable of sustaining every other generation, you know, prior to, you know, including them. It's either been taken down, you know, been stripped of its resources, or the population is just too big. So, hey, let's move out to the country. Let's move to the suburbs, you know, same sort of concept. You move out a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. Well, over the course of, you know, 30,000 years, you get from Africa to Siberia, but it's 30,000 years where all those places develop their own unique genetic backgrounds, you know, because of your gene pool population, their own unique cultures, their own unique technology to deal with those areas. People who are living in the Mediterranean do not need necessarily heavy fur clothing, but the people living in Mongolia do. At the same time period. Why is that? Oh, well, because the climate is different in a place. Those people have technologically adapted to that space. To travel such a long distance.
Yeah. Looks like my camera finally died on me. I had
that
situated. Yeah, no, it's fine. We can continue. It is about 2.5 hours, but let's just go ahead and finish up where you was.
Okay, well, was at. So when people postulate these theories of like the Egyptians made it someplace, they're pinpointing very specific place that the Egyptians wouldn't necessarily have knowledge of at a time period where your existence is pretty subsistent based. You're not necessarily going to expend the resources to get to that place that you don't even know is there. You know, if you need to move, you will move to the next convenient place. You know, you're going to move to Italy. You're going to move to, south to Kenya. You're going to move somewhere that you will not outstrip your resources. And, once you get to a good spot, you'll stop. You're not going to pass up all of this territory that's perfect to live in to deal with all that hardship and make it to Toledo. So the ideas that the Egyptians anyway got to the Americas, as we would know Egyptians, as we could recognize as Egyptians, it doesn't make sense from a very instinctual standpoint of humans. We're just animals. When you break it all down to brass tacks, we will take, we'll stop expending needless energy when we can, which means if they would get to a place where they could live without being, eaten by tigers or harassed by more powerful tribes, they would get to that point and they would stop. They would not continue going unless there was something driving them. And if something is driving them, there's going to be accounts, or there's going to be some sort of influence, or those expeditions will disappear and never make it. There's all these factors that go into what essentially would prevent a large scale movement that I don't think are even looked at by some of the conspiracy theorists. I pointed out that if, say, the Egyptians made it and they landed in Georgia in their fragile little boats that somehow didn't sink, they would have to travel 2,000 miles to the Grand Canyon, and they'd have to go back by 336 or 338 different indigenous tribes. How come those groups never mentioned Egyptians?
Yeah.
In their mythology, in their genetic makeup, in their technology. Some of the first firearms used by the indigenous peoples of North America were taken from trappers that the indigenous people killed. There's a technology that you cannot, that has 100% changed their worldview. That does not disappear from the archaeological record if they could recreate it. And at that time period, the Egyptians would still be predominantly using stone tools and copper or tin, which exists here. To travel such a long distance.
Yeah. Looks like my camera finally died on me. I had that situated. Yeah, no, it's fine. We can continue. It is about 2.5 hours, but let's just go ahead and finish up where you was. Was at.
So when people postulate these theories of like the Egyptians made it someplace, they're pinpointing a very specific place that the Egyptians wouldn't necessarily have knowledge of at a time period where your existence is pretty subsistent based. You're not necessarily going to expend the resources to get to that place that you don't even know is there. If you need to move, you will move to the next convenient place. You're going to move to Italy. You're going to move to, south to Kenya. You're going to move somewhere that you will not outstrip your resources. And, once you get to a good spot, you'll stop. You're not going to pass up all of this territory that's perfect to live in to deal with all that hardship and make it to Toledo. So the ideas that the Egyptians anyway got to the Americas, as we would know Egyptians, as we could recognize as Egyptians, it doesn't make sense from a very instinctual standpoint of humans. We're just animals. when you break it all down to brass tacks, we will take, we'll stop expending needless energy when we can, which means if they would get to a place where they could live without being, eaten by tigers or harassed by more powerful tribes, they would get to that point and they would stop. They would not continue going unless there was something driving them. And if something is driving them, there's going to be accounts, or there's going to be some sort of influence, or those expeditions will disappear and never make it. There's all these factors that go into what essentially would prevent a large scale movement that I don't think are even looked at by some of the conspiracy theorists. I pointed out that if, say, the Egyptians made it and they landed in Georgia in their fragile little boats that somehow didn't sink, they would have to travel 2,000 miles to the Grand Canyon, and they'd have to go back by 336 or 338 different indigenous tribes. How come those groups never mentioned Egyptians?
Yeah.
In their mythology, in their genetic makeup, in their technology. Some of the first firearms used by the indigenous peoples of North America were taken from trappers that the indigenous people killed. There's a technology that you cannot, that has 100% changed their worldview. That does not disappear from the archaeological record if they could recreate it. And at that time period, the Egyptians would still be predominantly using stone tools and copper or tin, which exists here. So even if we didn't have the original artifacts, we would have artifacts made to mimic the original artifacts. Because if it worked, it would be recreated. So, there's that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, hey, man, look, it has been fantastic having you on.
Yeah. I'm sorry it was a huge ramble.
Oh, no, dude. Like I said, like I've told every guest, this is your episode. I contacted you because I like what you like to say, sure, and I want to hear from you. So, sure. Some of the best podcasts I listen to is where the host kind of just shuts up and then maybe ask a couple of questions and the other guy just runs for the entire episode.
Well, I have a habit of doing that. I run and I go on tangents and it never makes any sense.
Oh, dude, I had a stained glass artist where we started with stained glass and tried hopping back in there, and then we went to like he kept going back to like socialism and communism ideologies, which I was just like, all right, fuck it, that's where the episode's gonna go. That's where it's
hey, you know what? That's all right. Stained glass is pretty impressive. That's one of those things that's it's one of those craft things that I always thought was pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Takes a skill set to make that, which you would have been near royalty if you had been able to create those things early on and nobody else knew the secret.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Well, hey, look, tell everybody where to find you, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all that good stuff.
Sure. I don't use my Facebook for anything, so we're not going to worry about that. But TikTok and Instagram, I am at Archaeowolf. And YouTube, I have a YouTube channel. It's called A Whiskey with a Wolf. And there's only one video on it now, but I'm aiming to make more. So if you go on my TikTok, my link tree or my link page does have everywhere you can find me, and I will be keeping it updated. But yeah, it's Archaeowolf at TikTok and Instagram.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been great having you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah. All right.
I appreciate it.
All right, man. See you. All right. Bye,
thanks.
everybody.
Bye.